There was a rich man who was notoriously known as a miser. Being a miser is not good, but a miser who, with all the riches he had, let his family around him struggle to exist. He had an elderly mother, a disabled brother, a widowed sister with children who could barely make ends meet. While he put all of his efforts into cherishing and protecting his wealth, his family begged for food, suffered humiliation, needed to call on others to help them. His own mother, who raised him, suffered, even though he could have helped her to be more comfortable. Research has shown, or has been done, on the evolution of our society, and it's shocking to see sometimes what people call progression. We live in a society that has experienced more change than the 100 years before us, but not all for the good. For instance, people used to keep their parents in their homes and care for their elderly, but today, with all our modern conveniences, we just ship them off to a senior's home. And it's estimated that about 70% of the seniors in seniors' homes rarely get a visit from their family. It seems like more and more our society is focusing on self rather than the good of others. I'm sure that Jacob didn't set out to destroy his family, but when he showed favoritism to Joseph, it literally tore his family apart. He suffered greatly for it, and the brothers all hated Joseph, lost their respect for their father, lost their moral compass. They even thought of murder, all because of favoritism on one person. Self-centeredness, of course, Joseph kind of went around and bragged about this. I had a dream and you guys are all going to bow down to me, and he kind of threw that in their faces, but self-centeredness destroys the fabric of the family as God designed it. When the father's more concerned about his wants and needs over the family's wants and needs, when the mother just wants to relax and just lets the kids go, and the grandparents say, they're there for us to spoil, and then send them home, I think that sends the wrong message. I think that sends the message of, I'm going to do what I want to do and not what's best for the family. Children are not the only ones that are self-centered. Parents can be very self-centered, but we are the ones that are supposed to be teaching them not to be self-centered. So self-centeredness is a sin, and it's very subtle, but it's very potent, and it creeps into many things, including Christian families. A survey was done in 2015, and the conclusion of the survey was that self-centeredness is killing America. What they meant is it's killing our Western society, because a society cannot exist based on individualism. A society has to work together to succeed. And having that kind of thinking, when we come into the Lord's church, sometimes it's a struggle for us. When we join the family of God, we have this baggage that we bring in with us that we need to work on. And one of those dangerous things in that baggage is self-centeredness. So we can work at it, but every once in a while, it kind of gets a bite into us. And did you know that self-centeredness is not biased? It'll attack any family, especially the family of God, because really it's a tool of the devil. The devil wants nothing more than to destroy the family of God. Today, the concept of family seems to be waning, and self seems to be taking over. It isn't the way God designed it to be, but Paul says in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, it's about family. It's about taking care of family, whether it's your physical family or your church family. And the illustration he uses is a church family. The Macedonians are a great example that Paul uses. And I first want us to look at their attitude. As we look at these Christians, there was nothing in their way of thinking that said something like, I don't want to do that, or I don't like that, so I'm not going to do it, or I think it should be done this way, or anything like that, or I don't have the time to do it, I don't have the talent. That wasn't in their way of thinking. They actually begged to be part of the solution of providing things for the relief of the saints in Jerusalem who were struggling to find food because of famine. They desired to be the ones that would step in and help take care of their brothers and sisters in Christ. Rather than sitting or waiting for someone else to do it or sitting on the sidelines, they jumped at the opportunity to be part of the solution. Too often people are unwilling to get involved and would rather just sit on the sidelines and let someone else do it who could do it better or who has more means to do it. You see that a lot today, but that wasn't the case with the Macedonians. And part of the reason for that is because of the love of the Lord that they had in their hearts. The Lord had their hearts completely. Not just when it was beneficial to them, but in their poverty, and they still gave of themselves to the Lord, even in their poverty. I've had people tell me that they're going to give themselves to the Lord, and then you watch how they live their lives, and you see anything but that happen. Because it's really easy to confess something, but when it comes to living it, it's another matter. And they don't really give their lives over to God. But then when something goes wrong in their lives, right away they're on God for it. These Christians, the Macedonians, gave themselves completely to the Lord. And it says, and then they gave themselves to his body. You see, part of the Lord, being of the Lord, is being of his body. So they gave themselves to the Lord and to his body. The Macedonian Christians were devoted to the Lord and his body. And that is why, when the need arose, they were willing to jump in and help out. Paul tells us in Romans 5:8 that God showed us his love while we were yet sinners, in that Christ died while we were sinners. Even though we were fighting God, even though we were opposed to him, even though we denied him and we continued in our sin, he sent his Son to die to take away our sin. The Macedonian Christians, having given themselves first to the Lord, followed in the footsteps of the Lord by practicing this love. Though Christ had everything with the Father, he gave it up for the sake of God's family. He became poor, Paul says, even to the point of suffering death on the cross, so that the family could grow and become stronger and larger and more glorious. He did it all for the family. The family, that kind of family, is the true light of God. Can you imagine if Christ would have looked at the cross and said, whoa, hold on, I don't like that, and I'm not going to do that? Can you imagine that? Can you imagine him saying, I'm not dying for those losers. They're all just a bunch of sinners. I'm not going to die for them. But he didn't do that. That would be called self-centeredness. Instead, he said, I will go to the cross and I will die for them. I will shed my blood so they can be cleansed of their sins. And the Macedonians, Paul says, are a good illustration of that being put into practice in this life. So they gave themselves to the Lord and to the body of the Lord. And as a result, we can see the attitudes that they had. When they eagerly wanted to help the church in Jerusalem, that was the church there was really struggling. They were starving. There was famine. A lot of them didn't have clothing, didn't have things like that, because in Jerusalem they were also considered outcasts and couldn't just go to the market and get food because they were outcasts. And Paul says, out of the Macedonians' severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and extreme poverty, it overflowed in a wealth of generosity. Think about that. They were not well off either, the Macedonians. They only had a little, and yet they were willing to share that little bit with the body of Christ. Can you imagine what the church would look like today if everyone gave out of their poverty? It's really easy when you have money to give some of that away. But when you don't have it to give, it's a little different challenge for a person. They gave of their means, of what they had to give. And Paul says, and they gave beyond those means. They literally gave till it hurt. They put their lives on the line for the church. Now, I've had people tell me, that's crazy. You need to take care of yourself first. And then if you can, then help out the church. But that isn't the way the Macedonians looked at it. We take care of each other, and we do that even if it costs us more than we would like it to cost us. Because it's family. It's what we do. It's who we are. And they begged for that opportunity. Well, you know, to do something on this scale, it would take an investment of time. So they didn't just give up their means, but they gave up their time. Something like that doesn't just happen. People have to get involved, and it takes time, especially in the first century. There were messengers that were willing to give up their time to take the giving to Jerusalem. Think about that. They were in Macedonia, so they had a long ways to go. That would have been weeks of travel. Would you travel for weeks today to serve the church? You know, they likely walked a lot of the way. There might have been some boating involved and different things, but they probably walked a lot of that way. Can you imagine walking, let's say, just to Edmonton to go shopping? We drive there in an hour and we think, no big deal. Try walking there and doing something and then walking back. That would be a taste of how they did things. Can you imagine the time investment that would be involved in walking to Edmonton and getting what you needed and walking back? Or doing a job and walking back? That's what we're talking about. So they took a lot of their time to do these things. They invested their time in the church. They spent time in prayer, praying for the suffering saints and praying for the gospel to reach the lost. You know, if I don't have time for the Lord and his body, why would I expect Jesus to have time for me? Too many people put off what could be done today for when they have more time. I have not met one person that has ever gained time by putting something off. They've lost time every time. And that's the truth. And so don't necessarily put off today what you can get done today, because tomorrow's going to need your time too. And the church always needs our time. When it says they gave of their means, another part of that giving of their means was their talents. God's given us all talents. He gave them to us not necessarily to satisfy our self-desires or our wants and our wishes, but he gave them to us to use in his body, the church. He gave us them to build up and edify the body of Christ. And that can be done in a number of ways. People say, well, I don't have a lot to give. That's okay. There's other ways you can give. You can give of your talents or your time, those kinds of things. Look at Lydia. She was a lady who made purple. And she was wealthy. She was in the church. And she used that talent and that wealth for the church. She became a leader of sorts in the church. Now you understand that making purple and selling purple was basically selling to the upper class or the royalty. And so there was huge money involved in that. But when she became a Christian, she devoted that to the church. Paul and Silas were tent makers. What did they do? Well, they used their talents to make a little money to keep them going along the road to spread the gospel. It wasn't to build up a business for themselves here. It was to help them get done what they needed to get done, and the pressing priority was spreading the gospel. These people all used their talents in the church. Barnabas was a landowner that sold his land and said, "Here, let's help out the church with the money." Things like that. So we have to ask ourselves a question. What are we willing to give to the church? The Macedonians chose to invest everything they had. They were all in. There was no such thing as playing church on Sunday morning for an hour. They were all in, all the time. According to Paul, they also did it with the right spirit. You see, we can do all these things and be doing them with the wrong motives, not in the right spirit. But Paul says they would do it in the right spirit. Today, when we talk about someone giving something generously or bountifully, we think of people like Bill Gates, who gives away maybe millions of dollars to a foundation of his choice, or a couple of foundations he's given to, different things. But think about this. If you had $50 billion to your name, what would $3 million, what kind of dent would $3 million do to your $50 billion? A penny to a dollar? A penny to $20? Something like that. Probably more, a penny to $20. It's easy to do that. And I'm not saying that's bad. That's a good thing. But Jesus said in Luke 21 and verse 2, talking about the widow who gave 2 copper coins to the treasury, in comparison to those that we believe were the Pharisees who were dropping in big amounts of coins. He said that widow gave more than all of those others that were donating. Why did Jesus say that? He said she gave more because she gave out of her poverty. She gave the last 2 coins she had for her life's existence to the treasury. The Macedonians gave generously from their heart. And Paul is saying that's following Jesus. Jesus said, like that widow, these Macedonians were good because they were not giving out of their wealth, but they were generously giving out of their poverty. They understood one thing, a concept that is far misunderstood today. This stuff that we get, that we're blessed with, is not for us to hoard. Jesus never meant it for us to hoard it. He never gave it to us for us to hoard it. He gave it for us to use. And if we use it in the right way, we help each other. We help the church. And the Macedonians understood that. And they gave from what they were blessed with generously to help the others. And they did it with a cheerful heart. They gave it with a smile on their face. When you're giving, can you hear the dollar bill slip through your fingers squeaking because you have a hard time letting go? Or are you giving with a smile on your face? No one had to remind them. No one had to tell them. They chose to do it. They understood their Lord. They understood their responsibility to the Lord. And it just kind of came natural to them. It wasn't an issue. It wasn't something they had to stop and think about a whole lot. They understood that God supplied everything, and they trusted in him, and that he will provide for them. And he did. Their action was based on a desire rather than being told they need to give. The right and godly approach to anything brings about joy and cheerfulness in the privilege of serving. An ungodly approach, well, that brings about self-centeredness. That's what happens. There's a mother who wanted to teach her daughter a moral lesson. So she gave the little girl $0.25 and $1 for church. Put whichever one you want in the collection plate and keep the other for yourself, she told her. When they were coming out of church, the mother asked the daughter which amount she had given. Well, said the little girl, I was going to give the $1, but just before the collection, the man in the pulpit said that we should be cheerful givers. And I knew I'd be more cheerful if I gave $0.25, so I did. Unfortunately, that's how a lot of people think. That really is. When we think of the Lord, it's important that we have things in the right perspective. We want to make sure that we have the big picture, the whole picture in our view, so that we don't get narrowed down into self-centeredness. That is why Jesus could go to the cross. He did and accomplished what he did. He didn't count equality with God something to be held on to. He saw the bigger picture in view, and so he went to the cross to serve the family of God. Everything that exists is God's. It all belongs to him. We have the privilege of enjoying it, but not owning it or hoarding it. And part of the privilege is sharing it. It's making sure that the family of God is all taken care of. For that to happen, we have to have the humility of Christ, be willing to die for the kingdom, be willing to sacrifice for the kingdom, and know that it's not ours to hold on selfishly. The Macedonians likely had their share of struggles, but sharing with the family of God or giving to the family of God wasn't one of them. I say today that the world suffers from the disease of sin that says the world is ours, we're going to take it for ourselves, we're going to own it, and we're going to do with it whatever we want. After all, I have the right to feel good about myself and accomplish what I want to accomplish and do the things that I want to do and choose to do. And no one should be able to run me down for doing that or put me down for doing that, because it's my choice. You cannot tell me what to do. You're not my boss. And so I'll hoard what I want to hoard and take what I want to take from this life. It's my choice. And to some extent, that's true. It is your choice. That part of it's true. When it comes to God and the family of God, the Lord's church, that kind of thinking can be poison. Is it any wonder that some people don't want to give, or at very best, they'll just give a little of the leftovers that they have? People are so busy, they don't have time to give to God because they got to get all the things done that they have to get done, and they have to accomplish the goals that they have. Time that we do give God often gets rushed because we're thinking of time we've got to spend in other places doing other things. But we have to understand something. The church isn't for us. We are the church. And we need to act like the church, the family of God. And that's why we need to keep God's perspective in view at all times. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 6:20 and also in chapter 7, verse 23, that we were bought at a price. You see, Jesus paid that price. That price was on our souls because of sin. And he paid it to purchase us out of the hands of the devil and our destiny for eternal destruction. When you are purchasing something, it means you own it. You bought it, you own it. When you pay the price required for whatever it is you're needing to purchase, it becomes yours. Jesus paid the price for your soul. And your soul is his. But he saved you from the depths of hell. And he added you to his kingdom. So it's a good thing that he owns my soul. That's a good thing. And what God requires of us is to walk humbly with him, to do justice and show kindness. But he also expects something else. God has always and will always desire our first fruits and not our leftovers. Too many people think in terms of what I can give versus how much I can give. Or I don't have a lot of time rather than I want to put my time into the church. It's important to think right. Perhaps it's that you can't have a lot. You don't have a lot, but remember the widow and what Jesus said about the widow. She gave more than the rest were giving because she gave of what she had out of her poverty. This morning, you know exactly where you're at with all of that. You know if you're in the kingdom or not. You know if you have been giving of yourself to the kingdom or not. And I want to challenge you to just think about it, consider it, reflect on that. And if there's any way that we can help you with that, or any need you have, we want you to come forward and let us know while we stand and sing.
Tempted and tried, we're oft made to wonder why it should be thus all the day long. Well, there are others living about us, never molested, though in the wrong. Farther along we'll know all about it. Farther along we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. Faithful till death, said our loving Master. A few more days to labor and wait. Toils of the road will then seem as nothing as we sweep through the beautiful gate. Farther along we'll know all about it. Farther along we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. When we see Jesus coming in glory, when he comes from his home in the sky, then we shall meet him in that bright mansion. We'll understand it all by and by. Farther along we'll know all about it. Farther along we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. Thank you. You may be seated.